Back on TYT Sports, the San Antonio Spurs are coming under a lot of interesting headlines going into what eventually will be the offseason. Now, that doesn't mean the Spurs are out of playoff contention. You never count out the Spurs. We learned that in 2014. We learned that in 2007, in 2005, in 2003. You just never count them out. But there was a major difference between those Spurs then and the Spurs that we have now. And while I give Greg Popovich the end-all, be-all, best coach in the NBA right now, one of two or three greatest coaches of all time in NBA history, there's only so much you can affect when some of your players are just way too old. Now, Tony Parker doesn't necessarily fit under the way too old category, but if you look back on his last two regular seasons and you take a look at what he was doing in the playoffs, there's some numbers that favor him, there's others that don't. He's not the Tony Parker that was in the Tim Duncan machine-like system that made the Spurs really what they were and what led them to so many titles. So the subject of this clip really is it time for the Spurs to move on from Ginobili and Parker, as well as Gasol and David Lee, and clear out not necessarily all of the veteran presence, but maybe start to really rebuild around Kawhi Leonard. The number one thing I see differently about the Spurs this postseason opposed to every other postseason in my lifetime is they don't find the really easy layup as often as they used to. They don't utilize the hockey assist as often as they used to, and they're not getting nearly as open looks as often as they used to. And the argument could be that, in a way, the Rockets are such a high-powered offense that it's starting to throw them off their rhythm. But we're talking about a team that historically, for the last 20 years, has never been deterred by a high-powered offense. They played regular season games, and I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I believe they lost a series to the Suns under D'Antoni as well. But the point being is here. So for one, I want to go to element 14 first, the Tony Parker card, because you can't say Tony Parker's a great player right now, and it's actually arguable that he's not even a good player. Based on his regular season numbers, his playoff numbers, so go back to that card, his playoff numbers are way different. But they still scare me in a couple of the specifics of it. For one, those are rankings based on all point guards in the NBA, not total players. 40th in PER amongst point guards. 26th in assist ratio amongst point guards, 47th in true shooting percentage amongst point guards. And his 2016-17 stats alone, 10 points per game, 4.5 assists, 1.8 rebounds. He's shooting 33% from behind the arc. He's never necessarily been the best shooter, but that didn't stop him from being a good scorer. His playoff numbers, again, different, but also take the starting point guard sample size, and you realize that being 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, you're middle of the pack. You're a middle-of-the-pack point guard. And when you watch Tony Parker try to facilitate the offense, it's different. It just goes to show, for one, how dominant of a player Tim Duncan was. And to say that he may have been the best player of his generation is not an understatement and could be very true. Almost every number, technically because of the rings and playoff success, supports that. We can go look at Andre's video in general to see what he made the comparison to Kobe and Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, all those guys. It's from a while back, but it's very interesting. So lastly, the Spurs free agents. Ginobili's averaging atrocious numbers. He's shooting below 30% from three. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's 39 years old. He's playing 15 minutes per game in the playoffs. He's only getting about 3.5 points. He's not the same anymore, and I don't know what else you can expect from him. Pau Gasol can't play defense. He did develop a three-point shot, but again, it seems too much like the Spurs are being a little bit on the isolation side, and that's awkward to see because that hasn't been who they are. So the idea is, do you move on from Parker, Ginobili, Gasol, David Lee? Maybe let Patty. It's not the Spurs' mantra to go sign big-name free agents. It's not this. It wouldn't be like the Spurs to sign Chris Paul. It wouldn't be like the Spurs to throw money at Kyle Lowry. But maybe you have to start rolling with the times, and you have Kawhi Leonard. You have a franchise player. You have somebody that, with a different supporting cast, I think they could be easily the best team in the Western Conference, even with whatever the hell's going on in Golden State and how much they can score at such easy baskets all the time for them. So going forward, I know it sounds crazy. I know it's a little bit harsh. Some pundits were saying if Pop was more like Belichick, Parker and Ginobili would have been gone years ago. And they would have moved on and they would still be in the same success and contention for a title. Don't get me wrong. This team could easily still beat the Rockets. The Rockets could also easily beat them. And they can give the Warriors a run for their money. I just don't think it's going to be enough to get them from being Western Conference contender to NBA Finals champion. Granted, I bet the Spurs because you always bet the Spurs because you never count out the Spurs. And no one will be surprised if Popovich has something up his sleeve. I just think it's worth noting that Tony Parker has fallen off considerably. He gets injured more often now. Probably got to move on from him. He's only 32 years old, I get that, but you might want to move on. Ginobili, got to move on, or at least find less minutes. 15 minutes is too much for him. 7-8 minutes per game is all he needs at this point. So the depth of the Spurs is of interest to me. I'm curious what happens in free agency. Who do they sign, especially with Curry, Paul, and Kyle Lowry technically available as of a day after the NBA Finals. I believe it is, or 5 days after the NBA Finals. So comment below, like, favorite, subscribe. Let me know what you think about the Spurs' future and what they need to do.